Freedom have left for this boss fight? They're gonna have to bring it. They are down 2 games currently versus Tempo Storm. And we are just about ready to get game number 3 underway. Potentially the last game, not only for the series, but of part 1 of phase 2 for HGC.
It's always a bit heartbreaking, but also satisfying at the end of parts and phases. You know, you feel like you're ready to begin a new chapter, but it's always sad to say bye to the old one. Hopefully, you know, Freedom can extend it a little bit farther by at least showing signs of life here in game number 3. But Tempo looks like, honestly, like they've evolved to a new form, really. You know, if you were to, you know, go in the Dragon Ball Z world of reaching the final form, they're near there. I don't know if exactly there, but pretty close.
Well, let's see where that potential final battle will take place. It is Warhead Junction, an old favorite now since the mid-season brawl for Tempo Storm. So it seems apt that they would pick this for the potential final game for them, not only for part 2, but of this series. An important game for both teams. Team Freedom, well, really, Tempo Storm have done what they needed to do. Team Freedom needs a victory in the series. So they need the reverse sweep that they had versus Roll 20 if they still want to get the top of the standings.
And Tempo Storm, though, as taking them to a map that should be predictable. They should have expected that Warhead Junction will be the map selection after Cursed Hollow. So at least Freedom is not kind of given the curveball. You know, I feel like every series with those high-impact ones, they got to be assuming specific maps and preparing specific drafts for. So luckily, we're going to a map that you could assume another double boss with the Warhead Junction.
Yeah, definitely watch for Tempo Storm to draft those boss killers. They've picked things such as Malthael. Greymane Abathur would be another duo for them to get, as well as Illidan.
And with the drafts we've seen already in the series, I mean, I wouldn't put it past them for another Task Tracer if they have the opportunity to do so. Might be a little bit harder here from the second pick slot, but I've seen wilder things. It all comes down to what they decide to ban after Freedom, removing themselves away the Uther.
Freedom have now been given Genji 2 games in a row, and Tempo Storm has been willing and able to adapt and deal with that Genji. Do you think that this requires a change in priority for Team Freedom at this point?
I want to say yes at first glance, but whenever you change in variety, that means that what you sacrifice in terms of the pick, you have to make up for through your first pick and the impact it's going to have. What I'm trying to say here is, though I do agree that maybe mixing things up to the best interest, giving up the Genji is not the right step. And so I feel like I can see why they may go in that direction, but it is a very high risk and something that I don't know if Freedom can afford at this point in time.
Illidan is another consideration for both of these teams. Obviously, Tempo Storm's been playing a lot of Illidan. Teams like Gale Force have been too, and Cure has been shown to like Illidan, but in this case, not willing to give up their Genji. Now Tempo Storm has the opportunity of getting that Illidan.
Got Tassadar too. Tassadar is what we should expect most likely in this rotation. It's just what beyond that point does Tempo Storm want? Do they want to try and focus more? I mean, you could high commit to the Illidan, but you also, you know, there's a lot of picks still remaining that can deal with him quite effectively. Again, Psalm has shown the Tracer, but they haven't picked them ever in the same rotation. They've been willing to wait until that secondary ban phase if the Tassadar was picked up here. And also with the Abathur gone, possibly that Dahaka, but I feel like that doesn't play into the playstyle that Tempo likes on Warhead. Again, it's all about the boss killer. They focus on one half of the map and just abuse the fact that they have taken so many structures onto one lane and then find themselves the victory through those Warheads.
Now, although Tempo Storm has loved picking Warhead Junction, it has not been a consistent win for them the way that Cursed Hollow is. Cursed Hollow, they've won 3 out of their 4 games there, only losing to No Tomorrow. But in the case of Warhead Junction, they have actually only won 1 of the 3 games here, losing to both No Tomorrow and Superstars on Warhead. So it is by no means over for Team Freedom in this series.
And by committing to the Illidan that high up, again, there's a lot of things that Freedom can do to be able to deal with this. Things that come to mind, obviously the Arthas and Brightwing are the focal point we have to have for Freedom. Collusion's already pretty much put on a clinic how to run that Brightwing, so I wouldn't be surprised if they commit to it, but this maybe not this high up. There are still a lot of options that would be only forced into it after the secondary ban phase. I want an Arthas from Team Freedom now that we see the Illidan coming online. But beyond that, I feel like it's their choice. Whatever they feel like they have the best odds into it. It just feels like the Arthas to be able to mitigate the Illidan is going to be a priority. And then, I don't know, at first glance, I want something to help stop the siege of Tempo Storm. You know, the pressure they apply to those front walls. Instead, they go deny the Tracer itself, pick up the Brightwing before the secondary ban, or second ban phase. and leaving up that Arthas.
I cannot believe I'm saying this, but Brightwing has been in every single game so far of the series.
It's
I knew
surprising.
I'd love this series.
Just because the Brightwing.
Yes.
You know, honestly, I wish I felt the same about a specific hero. Like that there was a hero I adored so much that it's like their involvement is all. I love some Slug. That's a good point. Any game that he's involved, but he gets banned out.
Slug.
He gets banned out. Why can't mine just be picked up whenever I want?
That's my new favorite quote of yours. I love some Slug. Dreadnought 2017.
Just dishing them out left and right. Tempo's taking a bit to consider what they want to get their ban to be.
Arthas, of course.
It's going to be the Arthas.
Yeah, I think that Tempo was very understanding of the situation that had they not gotten Illidan there, Freedom would have been fine to pick Illidan along with Genji. Heck, they did it last game.
Yeah.
Team Freedom are going to ban Li Ming, though, so take away a favorite damage dealer, a favorite ranged of Tempo Storm. It does still leave Greymane up, though.
Yeah, Greymane was the thing I was looking for in this series. It's another boss killer, though we don't talk about it too much. His damage output is some of the highest on single target sieging in the game, as long as you're in Worgen form there with your Wolf Heart popped. But taking them into consider, they don't know if maybe this is the absolute direction they want to move. If they weren't going to go with the Li Ming, what would we expect from them? With the TAS Illidan, I mean, you want to immediately look towards those frontliners. They're questioning if, oh, you know, now that you think about it, the Ariel makes a lot of sense here. Having an Illidan up with that Tassadar and then building, you know, the trifecta that we know to go confidently with an Illidan on top of it, it's one of the best strategies to exist in modern day meta.
So no Ariel, Brightwing, no possible no warrior strat for Tempo. We've seen that occasionally, and on this battleground, E-Star has run it versus Tempo Storm and had quite the successful run with it too.
They had a heyday in that game.
That was a heyday.
It was a heyday.
That is a great word to describe it.
Do we see the Stitches still here? I mean, it's surprising he's made it this far through this draft, but he still makes it through. Maybe no attention towards the Stitches on a map like Warhead. So much focus going in towards those bosses and having control over them, and a lot of the globals and mobility. The Karazim priority there for Tempo Storm, that is a very high Karazim for June. I say high in the terms of not where it was selected, but how many supports were available and which one he decided to move into.
June has been interesting throughout all of Phase 2, only playing 3 heroes, and yet in this series specifically, flexing to 2 new ones. Now, obviously, he's played both Brightwing and Karazim before, but to play Uther, Malfurion, and Rhaegar for 5 weeks straight, and then come to this week, say, nope, we're going to start bringing in the Fairy Dragon and our Monk.
Probably back to that original point we talked about in the last series with Karazim versus Tracer. We know the relationship there. Collusion obviously didn't have the tools available to be able to deal with the Tracer of Tempo Storm, but maybe June has the handle over Freedom. 3 seconds left, and we get the final 2 picks of Freedom, Chen and ETC.
It feels same thing.
Feels like we changed sides. And an ETC, talk about a wild pick there. That is something we've seen almost none of. I want to say we've seen 1 ETC in all of Phase 2 so far for North America. I know we've seen a bit in Europe, but just in NA, I think there's only been 1 game.
Beef the Guitar Star.
Is that his nickname? Beef the Guitar Star? I like it.
There has not been a whole lot of ETC. More so in Europe.
Yeah, a lot more in
likely
Europe.
that he is able to pop, or he does pop up there.
What is this pick for Tempo? Do they commit to a primary warrior, or do they run a little Roll20-esque with leaving the Illidan Dahaka to be enough to draw aggro on the front line? They don't have to. They could commit to a backliner here if they wanted. I want to hate me a Tyrael right now, I'll tell you that much.
Is it Arthas? A noob.
It's going back to the standard there with the Anubarak. Stitches nowhere to be found on Warhead, though. That's really interesting, again, because Freedom has been so high priority on that hero and not committing to a diva whatsoever in the series, only getting banned out once, so showing that they are very much trying to adapt themselves just when it comes to draft priority overall and what they think is the most effective, not being pushed away from it, but still avoiding it.
How much of a deny was that Chen pick, do you think?
I feel like it was a little bit of a deny for sure, but I don't think it was only it. It was a kind of like a, we think this does work synergistically with our composition, but it's also like we can assume that they may want to move into that. So let's try and take both, you know, get the 2-for-1. I'm not convinced though that it was 100% in either direction, to be honest.
First Kier Chen.
First Kier Chen.
Hype.
Hype. And, you know, Kieran Chen, that's an interesting one because it now has a very different objective than some of the other roles. Or not so much different objective, but more how he can distribute the damage and play it out. It's a lot different than most of the heroes we actually see him on, so that would be fun to be lookout for. And I wonder just the ETC, you know? Is this stage dive? Is this Mosh?
I think it'll be stage dive.
I think it's going to be stage dive too, just for the global pressure and that they want it onto the map.
Well, ready for the game. Let's get into it and see if Team Freedom can bring us back and take us to game number 4. The big difference here is that Team Freedom does not possess the Tassadar that Tempo Storm had to help Brightwing in the last game, so that Brightwing could be more aggro in her positioning, jump in along with the Tracer or a Chen to separate out the team. But it is against a Karzim, so we'll see if Team Freedom can separate the members of Tempo Storm the way Tempo did to Team Freedom, give them a taste of their own medicine in game number 3.
One thing to keep in mind as well is Brightwing has been played in all 3 series, but when Team Freedom played it, they ran with the Emerald, or they went with the Blink Heal and lost. And when June played it, went with the Emerald Wind and won. Personally, I'm more of an advocate for the Emerald Wind. I'd like to see Collusion venture into that. It's such a strange heroic choice because when at first glance you're like, well, then it makes my biggest weakness better, but then when you fail, you still fail to win the long fight. Yes, it extends it a smidge longer, but it's not typically long enough to compensate for your weak healing early on, which is why the Emerald Wind secures that the fight is going to be quick and effective. But bringing a quick and effective fight is going to be Freedom here onto Psalm as we get a bit of a trade.
That elusive brawler will be handy versus the Illidan of Tempo Storm. Looking at the talents, nothing immediately stands out. Iron Fist, of course, for June. Have to say, June's play has been terrific this series. Definitely a highlight for Tempo Storm, but all of Tempo Storm has been absolutely insane this series, and it's been really fun to watch. But June, it's nice to see him. We have heard from him, you know, the struggles that he has had, especially as of late. So it's nice to see him back and making a ton of plays for the team.
Yeah, I agree. You know, he kind of had that small lull where it felt like he was beginning to struggle even within the North American scene. But this series specifically, he is back in tip-top form. Collusion. Being a, you know, a solid 1v1er as Brightwing. You have zero respect towards your opponent because nobody can really kill you unless they CC you to death. And other than that, you're just a placeholder for experience. So yeah, drop as many B-steps as you can, Collusion.
Cheeky.
Throw it in their face.
The cheeky Brightwing.
You sounded like Bakery so hard right there. Bakery or Claris or Snitch, one of the 3. One of the English folk.
That's not so bad to sound like.
You know, Claris is pretty bad, but the other 2 I agree. Warheads are up.
Brightwing's channeling on the bottom. Up at the top, there's Illidan and Tassadar, so it should be a straight trade between the 2 teams of the nukes. And of course, both will look to drop them off as fast as they possibly can. Drop them off and start the pressure in one of the boss lanes. For Tempo Storm, that'll be up and top. Does trend toward top for them. Brightwing's gonna phase shift in.
Yeah, that was really beautifully done. So actually, what we saw there was just the fact that Kier couldn't withdraw, otherwise he was going to be hit by the Warhead. And then they just kept up the constant pressure, and he was sitting in a position where if you drop, you brew, you die, you continue the brew, you die, and if you try to flying kick, walk away, you're dead. It was the absolute no way out of there, and very well done by Tempo Storm. The only way he could have escaped if his Tempo conveniently killed the sidewall for them, but they waited till he was dead before that happened.
Tempo Storm. If somehow you guys have not been able to see Tempo Storm on Warhead Junction, what they do is they get one nuke, they pressure a boss lane heavily, they make sure that they draft good boss-taking heroes, and then they immediately take a boss after they've been able to take out a fort, or just about as quickly as they possibly can. They are working on getting some pressure, and teams since then have figured out their game plan, but being able to take out a fort this early into the game bodes extremely well for how they like to play out this battleground.
Yeah, especially for Solm. He's going to be focusing on getting a lot of mercs. You know, Community already started it up, but mainly that merc up on top, the good old glorious boss of Warhead Junction. Team Freedom threw down a nuke of their own here on bottom, but you know, it's not getting double damage on anything. It just weakens the front wall. It's really funny. There's been a shift in kind of paradigm on how Warhead Junction nukes should be played out since the initial release of the map up until we received modern day meta. Back in the day, it was double damage always under the core structure, take out the front wall, and then later get the fort. Now it's like cycle the pressure onto the front walls and get as much experience as you can, and then abuse your experience advantage over to your opponent. The boss started for Tempo. It's going to be a clean kill here unless Chen can manage to find a miracle moment up on top. That's not the case.
They are at least going to try to get, well, it looks like they were going to try to get their own Bruiser Raven camp, but they want to make sure that they can clear out the Raven camp and just deal with the boss as soon as they can, not let it do any damage to the keep structures. As we'll let Tempo Storm have control of the battleground for a little while and what they want to do. It looks like they want to just push and siege in the mid lane, try to get some experience off of these structures so that they can get to 10 even faster.
4 warheads are going to join us here. Psalm starting the bottom boss. A bit of a risky play considering the double warhead on top. They decide to withdraw. Somebody's committing. A new Barak is making the transition up towards top. It's going to be Caterpillar there. But they actually back out and instead, take the camp. And now Cattle's going to start this up. He will be interrupted by Zugrug. This is really interesting how the teams played out this warhead phase.
They are all split across all of them except Nasmus being able to pick up theirs. Now it's Caterpillar and Zugrug here. And Cattle has to back off. Karzim is there as well, hoping to stop in zone, and Caterpillar will be able to deny ETC from a free pickup.
Stansky's last effort. Caterpillar already got the pulse bomb. Polymorph is going to be there. Do they have it? No. Burrow charge away, but Dansky on the other side. That was a nice little gift to find coming out of the ground over that wall, and now Freedom found themselves their first kill of the game and a couple of warheads behind it.
This is the entire time, though, Dahaka was able to pick up the nuke in the bottom and shoot it toward the bottom fort, and they will follow that up with the second that Tempo Storm were able to get, taking down the fort just about, along with Fury sieging, and that gives heroic abilities. Divine Palm again.
Tempo slowed down their tone here
yeah.
on how they play Warhead with the cycling up to bottom rather than all ending through the top lane. They are still prioritizing, obviously, the boss lanes and enabling them, but it's not nearly as, one lane focused. And I feel like that's because, didn't we watch them get punished last time they played it, like very heavily?
Well, now they're turning up the heat because they're going to dive in and steal away this mercenary camp. Dansky is going to use Dragon Blade and start to go in, slicing and dicing through Psalm. Palm has been dropped on top of Psalm. The Cocoon dealt with, and Dansky's right back in with the blade. Swift strikes through, hoping for the kill on Psalm, but Psalm has gotten away.
Somehow, dude, how did he manage to make it out there? Get the hunt while he had the palm, and then it dropped. And he still managed to make it out. Nobody being able to get the last tick there on to Tempo Storm. Fury, though, I don't know if he's going to have the same luck Psalm did. Just interrupt the burrow is all it's going to take. Not even necessary. They get the kill. The boss has been started for Tempo.
So like I said, Tempo Storm has obviously lost 2 out of the 3 games where they have that strategy, so they should definitely look to make some adaptations. I also think that it is telling to them maybe of the respect that they have for Team Freedom, that they're not so blatant in their aggression, but Team Freedom are going to be ready to aggress once again.
Mosh Precleanse is enough to bait them away from this boss and buy a bit of time. Tempo Storm better be careful. They're going to go in. They tried it all in onto Brightwing. They might be able to get it, but that Mosh Pit is hitting 4 people. Genji now is getting reset on top of reset. The Cocoon is there. Boss over to Freedom, and now Tempo is trying to find a way to minimize their losses.
That was just about the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life.
It's a dance party, and you're invited, Tempo Storm.
What? My goodness, he kept Collusion alive.
He did. That was very, very well done here for Team Freedom. Now we see maybe a bit of the reasoning as why we're going into the mosh pit for them. Rather than worrying about getting the global, what if they just stop the bosses? Because they have themselves a nice Nice tool there with the mosh pit.
And they know that that is Tempo Storm's method of winning on Warhead Junction. Team Freedom steal the boss. They're opening up this keep. Cure's ready to go. Team Freedom are ready to take a game off of Tempo Storm. They've got the pulse bomb down on top of Psalm. They're slowing him down. Palm just barely hits.
Man. Fury, he burrows. He lives. The adaptation goes off, but the hunt onto the back line. They're going to go in. Karzim is dead.
It's still going. Drag pulls Zugrug in, but he is happy for that kill. That's 2 down. This boss is still very healthy. Team Freedom are bringing down the core in 8 minutes and 50 seconds into this game.
And it looks like they have got themselves a win here over Tempo Storm. And they're going to set this series now 1-2. Very well done for Team Freedom. Having the upper hand on Tempo on even one of their own maps. And showing that kind of sign of life.
Does the comeback begin?
Yeah, that's what I'm sitting here wondering. Is like, is this where we get the reverse sweep?
Does it start here?
I think so. I'm ready for it. All right, let's break it down. Is it possible? Yes. Is it realistic? I'm not sold yet. That whole game, you talked about it, Warhead for Tempo Storm hasn't had maybe the best results on how they play it out. And that whole game, it was very apparent that they tried to kind of make the same thing happen. Freedom responded, and the one team fight that they needed to win at the 10-minute mark, they ended up winning the game. So it's just kind of like, I'm not convinced yet. You know, you said you needed one more game before getting to that point. I got to see another here from Freedom. But if they win game number 4, Tempo's got to be slowing it down, thinking about what they've been doing wrong.
Team Freedom, man. Never count them out until they're actually out. They very impressively won that game. It was a short game at that, too, being able to win off of the single boss, getting the picks that were necessary even at the keep. And a lot of that, we've talked about him so much. We got to talk about Cure. Cure on his chin, as well as Psalm. Psalm playing Illidan in the last game. Higher kill participation. Now I'm messing up with that word.
It's a hard word.
But it's just slightly in favor of Psalm. Both of these players are integral to the team fights for both teams.
Yeah, 95 kill participation there is actually ridiculous coming out from Psalm. But Cure is showing that, you know, for being the new blood of North America, he really does put up a fight, even winning when it comes to the KDA. Their damage is comparative, so just showing that he is very effective with his resources and his default kits. He's making things happen. When he drops the Dragon Blade, it's one to be respected.
You can see the difference of siege damage too, but it does make sense that Cure is the one that would be split soaking more often. We don't necessarily see Psalm doing that too much. Generally, that is Fury who would do that, but the stats are very close for both of these players. The death's really close. I have to say that Psalm he's gone down a lot in average deaths per game. He has really cleaned up a lot of his act from the start of Phase 1. You can see it, and you can see that from all of Tempo Storm, especially as we neared the end of Phase 1. They focused a lot on making sure that they weren't making the same kind of mistakes. They played clean games. But in those clean games, they started to not be able to bring in the aggression that we expected from them. Yes, they were winning the macro game really hard, but you wouldn't see them trying to maybe take advantage of any mistakes in the way that we wanted to see from them. And so that seemed to be the next evolution for them. And part of that was the role swap for Caterpillar. And it's just so fantastic to see Tempo Storm finally be able to come into their own just in this final series as they get ready for the Western Clash. I'm very excited to see how they can do versus the European teams there.
Yeah, it really does. By far betters the odds for North America. You know, that Tempo Storm has made the change and that they got the recovery within the window that was necessary, because otherwise, you know, it could be very scary for the performance of North America at the Western Clash. Europe's pretty intimidating, but, you know, we're doing our best to be able to catch up, and I'm feeling like we've done a pretty good job of it in Phase number 2 so far.
Yeah, and you have to credit the teams that got a lot of experience from Midseason Brawl, both Roll20 and Tempo Storm coming back and helping to infuse the region with so much more experience. And that's helped teams like Team Freedom be able to get to where they are, taking a game off of Tempo. Let's see if they can do